exciting to talk about like kind of new technology and stuff. And I know a lot of people that kind of follow the Production Tech Academy are interested in kind of PA setups and stuff and tuning PA systems. So it's really cool to be able to talk about this Elisa system. It's next generation immersive sound. It's so cool. So if you don't mind, could you guys introduce yourselves and then also tell me in what capacity you had this system deployed?
Sure. So I mix Alt J, and we decided to do Elisa at Forest Hills, New York, or the Forest Hills Stadium in Queens. And not only did we decide to do Elisa, we decided to do 23.1 surround with Elisa, which at the first moment I thought, this is going to be insane. There's no way to do this. But it turned out that it was one of the coolest things I've ever done or ever been involved in. So yeah, I mean, that was we did one show there, and then we did two more at Royal Albert Hall at the end of Alt J's run of shows that, for that tour. And that was pretty much it. Kind of similar, a lot of differences being indoors and outdoors, which I could talk about, and but that was it for me.
Cool. Xandy, you were touring with the system a bit, right?
Yeah, last fall we had a new record cycle, and we jumped up to arena level, and we did two legs. The first leg was with a left-right system. Right after we did 5 days of production rehearsal with Elisa, so I was ready to go. And then the second lesson was all Elisa except for one left-right gig at the Anthem in the middle of the tour. So it's kind of interesting to have to go back and forth right there. And it was also cool to do an arena tour with the left-right and then go to Elisa and have some real experience comparing the two and seeing what I liked and what I didn't like between the two.
Right. So when you had it up, I mean, Lance says you were at 23.1 surround. What is there like a standard with that system that people usually do?
Well, it's scalable. I mean, the standard generally is what they call the focus system, which is in an arena, let's say. And Forest Hills is basically an outdoor arena. It's not a stadium like a great big football stadium. It's about 10,000 seats. Still big, but anyway, just for the scale of it. The focus system is 7 arrays. You basically have 5 that kind of go across the front of the stage or follow the size of the stage, and then a couple of extensions out on the far left and right. And it's scalable. The system is scalable, so you could do only 5 if you had a smaller space. You still need height. You always need height because all of the arrays are above everything. For us doing surround, it was just turned out to be kind of a nice amount that would fit around the arena. Mm-hmm. It could have been 24, it could have been 22, it could have been 10, but that was kind of for the size of that and where the way the structure was built, that's how it worked. It worked well.
All right. So you had a company bring obviously everything in that day. You didn't have to really like tour with the crew to hang this every day, but
no, the funny thing was we were touring, so we had some of it with us anyway, but we had to augment it all in New York and find speakers from wherever we could find them. I didn't do any of that, thankfully. My friends that did wanted to pull their hair out a little bit because it was a job. The prep for that was pretty tough. Just that part of it, just the logistics of where are we going to get all the speakers to do this,
Yeah, totally.
So,
yeah, Xandy, how many did you guys have a truck full of PA system? I mean, I guess if you were.
Yes, we did. And we had to, it was actually different PA going from the left-right leg to the Elisa leg. The biggest thing is K1 doesn't have a dispersion wide enough to do Elisa. Elisa's got to be 120 boxes generally. So we had to do a little bit of juggling there, but and we did the 5 hangs for the stage and then 2 on each side actually. So we had 9 hangs for the Elisa system and then 2 outfills and our sub hangs in the center.
So how many points is that altogether? Like,
We needed for this level, we used cable bridges and we split the PA into two halves and had each half on a truss. But one of the things that I think might have messed Gambino up a little bit is they tied audio and video together truss-wise, and then when you have a problem with one, suddenly everything's coming down and the whole room comes to a halt. We learned from their mistake and separated the things, and even separated the PA into two halves so that you can have a little more leeway if there's a problem that you need to solve without stopping everyone else from working.
yeah, it's like, I guess, you know, with kind of new technology, you're kind of playing guinea pig a bit.
There's a lot of bleeding edge, as we used to call it in the computer industry. The extension hangs, the ones that are super wide, you know, there's a big, like, well, how do you get them out there? Because they're over top of bleacher seats in an arena, and you can carry them up one by one, which techs are gonna grumble about for the whole time. And we kind of learned a trick there, is you can actually kind of put a point on the floor and swing them over, and the focusing of the extensions is not totally critical, so you can kind of get away with a single point hang and tying them down, because you don't have to be down to the inch with those outside guys.
Yeah, that's crazy. So, I mean, when you're like kind of building all these systems out and planning it all, were you working with specific systems engineers from L-Acoustics with this stuff, or did you have who were you kind of like partnering with to kind of?
We chose Firehouse because they had done the Lord tour.
Gotcha.
And that it was very important to me to choose a company that had done this before, so that we learned from their mistakes that they'd already made, you know, because we are on the bleeding edge here. And I think that really panned out in our instance, having to tour with us. So Firehouse was amazing. Their dudes are smart and capable. It was a very positive experience. And in general, everything was super smooth. And it can go wrong pretty quick if you're not smart about production, I think.
Yeah, I've definitely heard some horror stories, you know. And who knows, you can't really point the finger with blame too easily because there's so many moving parts with this stuff, and
right.
And it's new technology and everyone's kind of trying to figure it out. But
Right.
it's just amazing that you guys are able to pull it off and actually put it in. I haven't been at a concert that's had it deployed yet, so I'm really excited to just kind of to mix on it someday, but also to kind of just to listen to it.
Absolutely.
So I mean, that's all well and good, all this stuff, but I obviously want to get into some mixing stuff and talk about what it was like to actually just be on these systems. And the first thing that comes to mind is panning. You know, like, and a lot of people ask about panning in general anyway, with just even a stereo system. You know, it's topic of discussion in live sound. You got to think about it, but I mean, it's a whole other world. So, I mean,
I've got a lot. I can say a lot about panning in this system. It's not really panning anymore. If you think about your conventional left-right PA, most of the time it's not even really left-right so much as like a kick drum, for instance. It's just dual mono. You've got a kick drum that you're physically or actually feeding a kick drum to both sets of speakers, and your perception is that it's in the center if you're standing in the center. If you're standing off to one side or the other, especially if you're standing right in front of, let's say, your right stack, I mean, you're just hearing the kick drum out of the right stack at that point. You're so far away from the left, there's no perception of any sort of stereo depth anymore. Well, with putting kick drum in the center, let's say on an Elisa system, you're actually putting it in a center array, and if you're standing off to the right, you hear it coming from the center. It's not so much that you're panning it across, panning anything across between any of that anymore and hearing, you know, some sort of phased version of those two speakers. You're actually hearing more of a point source kind of thing. And that does a lot for clarity. At least my experience was it was weird how it sounded. It was weird how much clearer, or my perception of the clarity of things in a mix that I heard every day for, you know, the better part of a year, how much I was just focusing on something and thinking, wow, that is so detailed. I can really hear that. And I mean, that's basically what it comes down to. You're placing things in certain spots. Now, I think, Sandy, I think your mix was a lot more complicated than mine.
Maybe. I had two drummers, and so that's always kind of a thing to deal with in any system, really. And Elisa really helped me deal with that in a kind of reasonable way, because just like you said, you can really experience a lot of clarity because it's only coming from that one speaker source. And I also found it kind of important to actually keep track of of exactly which array it was coming from inside of the Elisa system, and because you got 9 arrays in front of you, and you can still get some phasing if you put your point between 2 arrays. It'll come out of both of those arrays, and you'll still get some phasing. So if you are nailed straight on one array, you might actually be a perceivable difference in clarity on a big scale, like inside an arena where you're fighting a lot of blur already, you know.
Were you trying to like mimic the stage, like kind of like try to, as you see it on stage, try to make spatialize things like that?
There is the concept of what you see is what you hear. From the old computers, what you see is what you get, a classic 90s GUI design. Yes, that's where we're at with audio. And I've always kind of obeyed that in my mixing to a certain amount, is just like mimic what's happening on stage. And with Elisa, you can get right there, because like Lance said, when you are standing off to the side and you have something in the center array, it sounds like it's coming from that direction. So you can make it sound like your mix is exactly what's happening on stage. If you want, you're not obligated to do that, but I personally enjoy that a lot. And so what you see is what you get if you obey those panning laws. It breaks down a little bit in the front, because your image goes up, and you kind of have to make some thought in how you set up your fill, how loud your fills are, because the fills are mono and they're going to destroy your Elisa image, but they're also going to bring the image down to in front of you. So that's cool too. So you kind of have to like decide where you want to go on that balance.
The really steep angles, if you're really close to one of the speakers or really off axis of one of the speakers, that starts to seem strange. That starts to, maybe it could be a little off-putting if you're, you know, if you want to hear something and you're way up front, way to one side, and it's coming from, you know, way to the left. Let's say you're way to the right and it's coming, you know, your angle, you're just visually, you can look and see where that speaker is. It's going to sound like that too. And that might be a little strange. You know, that might not work that well for that listener. But I found that as I moved back, especially all the way at the back, it sounded remarkably similar to my normal mix, because the angle is not that steep anymore, but it retained a serious amount of clarity. I could walk the floor of the it was basically tennis courts. That's what that arena was. I could walk front to back, side to side. I didn't have any of the lobing in the bass that you would usually have. All the low end sounded great, and all of the instruments really sounded the same everywhere I went. The mix, pretty much, I could have mixed from anywhere on that floor. So that was startling. That was something I've never experienced.
Yeah, I agree. I experienced the same thing, and it was amazing. That by itself is enough reason to use Elisa. Just the fact that tonality and coverage throughout a very, very large venue is just way, way, way more consistent than you can achieve with the left-right. It's just a huge thing in my mind.
So is that true all the way through the sub frequencies too? Like all the way down, you kind of got that consistency everywhere?
It is true, because Your low end stuff you tend to put, actually you're kind of mandated with Elisa to put in the center, and the sub is a flown center hang. And so the alignment between your tops and your sub boxes is very, very, very good, much throughout the venue, much better than you can achieve with any kind of different sub arrays with a left right system, just because your low end is all coming from generally the same point in the center. And so that extends throughout to the sides, throughout the, it's pretty incredible what a difference that makes in the low end.
We had a little happy accident at Forest Hills where they have some noise issues with the neighborhood. You know, they were really worried about flown subs, and the thing about it is you can get more coverage, you can get better, much more efficient SPL out of less speakers flown you would on the, you know, just on the floor.
All the fat kids.
Yeah. So but the happy accident was, okay, well, we'll bring in subs if the flown doesn't work, if it causes too much sub out in the neighborhood or whatever, we'll have some subs on the floor. So we put them all there. Now, it turned out that we didn't have any problems at all with noise. It was awesome. But what we did find was that when you got up to about, it was general admission, and the seating was available almost up to the stage. When you got really close, you were almost a little bit too close for where the subs were throwing. So we turned them on, but they were a lot quieter than they ever would be. But we had little front fill subs, and we ended up with we didn't have a big stack. We just had a row on the floor. So it was good that we had them. It made that the front few rows better, but it didn't interfere with the rest of it. That was the cool part.
How much height do you actually need to fly these? What's the trim height? I mean, do you know?
You need a lot of height because if you think about it, your PA is all across the front of the stage, so it's got to be, you know, above your lights. Anything that's happening lighting wise, video wise, with the side angles throughout the whole entire venue, your PA has to be 100% above all of that. So it's up there. It's usually if it's a low arena ceiling, it's touching the ceiling, and you're chopping boxes off the top of your arrays actually just to fit the PA in there.
Oh, crazy.
So, there are a lot of theaters that would be hard to do it in, especially theaters with a balcony. I mean, you wouldn't get it under the balcony, I don't think. Arenas, obviously, and stadiums. There are a couple of, there've now been a couple of purpose-built clubs that have it, but it's purpose-built, and it's not something that you would tour with a big light show anyway. Probably it would be.
Oh, we had a big light show.
Yeah, well, Alt J also. It's a pretty amazing, pretty big light show. Hey, man, whatever.
Yeah, totally. Hey, yeah, no one goes to hear the lights, right? Yeah. But so someone asks, how do you handle front fills? Are they all in the same signal or split apart with differing signals for each sound object? I assume it's just kind of a mono mix.
So far, that's my experience. I think they're working on imaging and duplicating what you have above. I don't know where they are with it yet. Do you know, Sandy?
I do. At least when I was using it a couple of months ago, we had a couple of options available from the Elisa processor, and this kind of thing is inside of the Elisa processor now. You're not doing it in your console anymore because all of this is post panning. So the Elisa processor can give you a mono mix, and it can give you a stereo mix, and it can give you a left center right mix, which I didn't use. And with the stereo mix, you actually have some adjustment on what part of the Elisa width do you want to include in that stereo image. So this is a kind of a detailed technical thing, but I ended up, if people out far can hear my extensions, which has my effects in it, then I actually want my stereo mix to be kind of drier for that outfill. So I ended up kind of having very little of my extensions mix inside of the stereo mix. And that kind of thing would actually bite me if I was trying to send a left-right from a festival or something like that. So there's definitely some gotchas in there.
Well, if you were going back and forth between left-right and Elisa, like, can you talk more about the problems you had when you were trying to like just go from one to the next, or did you have completely separate show files that you used?
I really wanted to have one show file, and I almost got there. But then something kind of bit me on that regard, and that is that a key point is that you're taking direct out of the channel, and I have a ton of stereo channels, and a direct out on your stereo channel, at least on the Digico, obeys your pan, your left-right pan, which I am no longer using with Elisa. And so now my left-right pan is actually messing up my Elisa objects panning, because those are two separate systems. And so at that point, I could not use the same session, but I could start from the same point and pretty much have the same session to start with, and then kind of diverge them to the two different things. Going back and forth is tricky.
I would imagine just even like what you expect to hear when the band starts playing, and you're like, oh wait, that's not what I was hearing last night, and it just try to change your brain, it seems
right. Except that we've been mixing left and right for our entire lives, and we've been mixing this band for our entire lives. So it's more like, oh yeah, this is Bicycle, I remember this,
I sort of had a little bit of a different experience. And yeah, same thing. I didn't quite have the same show file. I would find things that I tried, but I would find things that didn't quite work in both directions. But one of the things I did at the start, I was really intent on, even though the recommended preferred method is direct outs, I was really intent on not destroying the mix that I had, because I loved it. So I did a lot of things where I was mixing to groups anyway for broadcast feeds, and I just sort of translated that to an Elisa mix and added a few other things, and had a few direct outs, I think, but I was using an Avid S6L, and I could patch whatever I wanted wherever anyway. So, things like, I knew I wasn't going to do anything weird with the kick or snare, that my kick and snare bus was effectively going to be one output. So I did a lot of things where I just sub-mixed things and then used those as my direct outs. So in effect, I was able to keep a lot of my, fader level type, fader and mute mixing that I'd been using for my left-right, and just leave the buses, wherever they needed to be for that day, for that mix. And that's kind of what I was doing anyway, but it afforded me a couple of things that I didn't see coming, which one of the main things, it's a cheap trick, but when I get into some trouble frequency wise, I always run to my 31 band and just make a quick cut and then figure it out, or whatever. But you can't do that, because you're effectively, in Sandy's case, it's like having 9 PAs. So you don't really have a 9 channel graphic EQ to just make that quick cut. I was able to narrow it down a little bit and use some of my bus EQ to do that kind of fix, and then figure it out with the system tech. But I wouldn't have had that if I hadn't done that, and that was just kind of a stroke of luck.
I actually found a way past that, Lance. On the Digico has some amazing latching capabilities, and I
knew this.
I brought all of my Elisa mixes actually back into the console for the sole reason of having a version of bus compression, system-wide compression, and a 31 band EQ that we love to grab in the heat of battle, you know, and I could not let go of that. And also a master mute and a master fader is another first question. Like, whoa, there's no master bus, there's no master fader. So bringing all of the Elisa channels actually back through my console gave me an easy solution to that with 31 band EQ.
I think you told me, I saw one of Sandy's shows, and I think you told me that. I think you were explaining that a little bit, and it was just like, well, yeah, you need just for your comfort level, you need things like that. You need to figure out things like that, and you know, like we're saying, on the bleeding edge of technology, you don't necessarily think about all of those scenarios right away. All of the little scenarios and all of the little things that people do in their own comfort zone with their own desk. And I mean, the way you usually mix.
So I noticed, Lance, that, you know, I feel like as engineers through our careers, like a lot of our tricks and a lot of our, you know, how do we do stuff and how do we make stuff better and make stuff more fun comes down to grouping and tricks on the grouping and tricks on the master bus. You know, I talked to an engineer that was like, you don't have a master bus? You know, I've got 8 plugins on my master bus that are crucial to just how I set up my mix. And for me, I didn't maintain any grouping at all. And I went all to direct outs on each channel, and that means all of your buses go away. And you gotta like that took a lot of brain damage to like, okay, how do I do stuff anymore? You know, like that drum bus trick that I love, you know, I can't do that anymore. That, you know, is just a lot of things that you have to kind of reevaluate. How do you set up your brain? You know, how do you set up your session? How do you set up your mix? To achieve things that you want to achieve without group tricks anymore. It was a pretty big thing for me.
That's interesting. Well, I can't even imagine like just taking a whole mix and redoing it like that way, you know, because how many channels were you running with that show, Sandy?
A lot. It was 90 from the stage. And then that's another potential gotcha with Elisa is it's 96 total, maximum 96 inputs. So I actually had to do some busing of my effects just because I was out of channels. And that involves some decision making of like, you know, how to accomplish that and where do I put my effects in Elisa.
And that's one thing that makes yours more complicated. I'm really at about 40 channels, 40 real channels of band, and it, you know, it's so that, you know, that already is less to deal with. And another reason I went to the bus situation, I was actually trying to get it all down to 32 outputs, and that was just to kill off another piece of hardware and, you know, basically the MADI card, the interfacing between an S6L and the Elisa processor. The MADI card on an S6L is BNC. The BNC input on the S6L, there's only one. So in order for me to get above the 32 outputs on the S6L card, I would have had to convert it to optical and then go in to the Elisa optically. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't want another piece of hardware. And of course we duplicated everything so we'd have a backup. So that would have been another, you know, just even more stuff. Mm-hmm. So I tried really hard to get it down to 32, and I did it. I in hindsight, I almost wish I had just said, forget it. It would have been a little bit easier to go have a few more channels, but anyway, it took a little bit of bit of work. It reminded me of days of multi-tracking on an 8-track where, okay, I'm going to punch in on this track at this point, and I'm going to use this one, at this point, in the song, and all that kind of fun stuff that we used to do.
So did your approach to effects change much? Were you guys using like less effects or more, or like more stereo stuff, or were you just trying to translate your original, what you had before, into that system?
For me, it didn't really change too much. I used the extensions for effects a lot. There wasn't as much across the front of the stage, and since I had the surrounds I put some of my effects into the surrounds and found that that was fine too. It like vocal reverbs and things like that. The surrounds it was difficult to figure out what was actually going to work and not cause timing weirdness. That was a fun math problem.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, Lance, I'm glad you said that, because I feel like timing is one of the first things that an engineer should think about when they jump on an Elisa system. And the idea is that, with a left-right system, you can pan your overheads hard left, hard right, and a guy sitting in the center, time arrival between your left-right hang is good, fine. And the guy over on the left, he only hears the left, so the time arrival from the right speaker doesn't matter, and the guy on the right, same difference. But with Elisa, that is not true. So now you have a person over on the right, and they can hear the left hang. So if you pan your drums hard left and hard right, you can have some insane time arrival issues that you don't necessarily hear at front of house, but that are pretty big on the sides. So you have to think about that.
Well, and it's funny you mentioned that, because it started making me think about my panning in my stereo mix too, because when you're at a festival with a big wide stage, you can start to get that, especially if you hard pan something that has no correlation to the other side. All of a sudden it's way, way over there, which,
right,
like you said, you wouldn't hear in the center.
Right. And you can be talking about, 80, 100 milliseconds of delay. That's not just a little bit. That's a huge amount,
Well, it's interesting. I don't know. How much, like, when you were really dialing in the mixes, were you guys like walking around these venues just like a lot, trying to get a sense of where it's at everywhere in the room? You kind of have to, right?
Well, so
yeah,
you also no longer have your favorite stereo test track because there's no stereo. And your test track is not a 9.1 or a 23.1 file. So, how do you dial in your PA every day is kind of oh my gosh, that's crazy. How do I do this? I solve that by taking a multi-track mix and kind of simplifying it to just some essentials that use the entire system, just one song, and a loop, making it just a little bit. So of course it still drives everyone in the arena crazy for an hour, but it was basically a way for me to evaluate be able to hear every single element in the Elisa system and hear somewhat of my mix and how it's translating, and how, hear kick drum, hear low end, hear the width of stuff, and your lead vocal, and how, make sure you can hear everything and your outfills are pointed in the right directions. But I don't know how I would have done that without a multi-track, to be perfectly honest. It was kind of crucial.
I used a multi-track also. I didn't quite get to that point, but I just used a couple of songs just to tune the PA, and we had a lot of data from all the touring anyway, so we knew what we wanted the PA to sound like. So we just did that. We put stuff on and tried to get it there in the same way. It was absolutely not a perfect solution, and that was that was the first time we did it, but it turned out fine. There are a couple of rules I want to mention. There are a couple of rules, quote unquote rules, that I broke in doing this. I had the surrounds. Like we're saying, it's placement. You don't get phase issues when it's point source. Even when you put stuff between speakers, you might still have a little bit of phase anomalies, but all of that's diminished because you're spreading it out across all these point source spots. So basically, you don't want to put the same element in two speakers or two arrays or whatever. However, there were a couple of spots, a couple of things in my mix where I put it everywhere, or I put one thing or maybe a stereo pair everywhere, just for the effect of having it just engulf everything, just because I had it, And that actually worked. It was a single element. There were a couple of times where I put in, there was a bass note or a bass part that just filled everything up. And one of the things that was really awesome was there's a song in our set that has a boys choir, and I just put that all the surrounds, basically left on one side, right on the other side. It was a stereo track that I had, and it just sounded like choir coming down from the tops of the arena from everywhere. That was pretty cool. But it was definitely a kind of not, it was a little bit of a rule break because there was definitely all sorts of phasing weirdness from that, depending on where you stood. It just didn't matter.
Yeah, with the choir, I guess you can get away with that stuff, right? It's just
it was a moment, It was a moment in the mix. It wasn't screwing with the mix for the whole time. So
well, and
fun.
I love that idea, Lance. That sounds amazing. And with my band, I had to be careful and be explorative on like how do you use this system and use the bling of this system without being too cheesy, because with my band, we're a hipster indie folk rock band, and too much cheese becomes really, really obvious real quick, and in my opinion starts disrespecting the music pretty quickly. But I still want to use the system as much as I can, without going over the edge.
I was really worried about being gimmicky. I didn't want to be gimmicky. And right. I didn't know how far I had gone, if it was going to seem gimmicky. There were a couple of cool things that happened in my show at Forest Hills, where people were actually moving up into the stands to listen to the surround speakers. They wanted to go hear it, and it was general admission everywhere, so you could go wherever you wanted.
Out of curiosity, what did you put up there? What did you put in all those surrounds?
Oh yeah, I should mention that because they were Sivas. We used L-Acoustics Siva around the bowl, and basically that's like having without the Siva sub included. That's like having the mids and highs of a K2. Mm-hmm. So it's like one K2 every probably 10 or 15 feet. I don't know. I don't remember what the calculation was, but it was they all of it together covered and got pretty loud, but obviously you don't want bass, you don't want low frequencies coming from everywhere because it just wouldn't work. So
what mix elements did you put? How did you use that humongous surround system that you had?
Well, some things Elisa allows you to move things all around, and you can either program it or do it in real time with an OCR device, which all of that is really cool stuff. You know, you can do it with an iPad and move things. You can connect it to optical tracking, and if you have a performer that's running around the stage, you can follow him. You can follow the person on stage, and So for me, I programmed I had some track elements that the band plays to a click track, and there's time code for the lighting at this point. So I stole all of that for myself, for my mixes anyway. Pulled out more of what they had, some of the kind of sound effects and nuggets that they had on their records. One being a police siren, for instance. And this is a thing where I was like, well, is this going to be gimmicky or not? And just flew the police siren around the venue. You know, there was a helicopter that did that too. And it sounded like it literally sounded like cops were driving around, you know. It was pretty cool. But again, you know, I don't know. Is that really what the band is about? You know, so it ultimately it went over pretty well. But beyond that, I had set up some zones with auxes that I could put anything out there at any point if I wanted to. I just had to be mindful of, timing. I had to, if I was going to put something there, I had to make sure there was one way of getting it there that would be directly there, and there was another way of getting it there that was delayed. And I had to know which I was doing all the time, so that I wouldn't get weirdness with having. I mean, you couldn't put a snare drum in the back, for instance. You know, it's 200 feet away. It was hard enough to figure out what I could put back there and have it not interfere timing wise with what was going on in the front of the stage. So all this stuff was kind of things like string pads. I could fade them up a little bit so they wouldn't have to be right on the beat, or, like this choir. It was kind of otherworldly anyway and verby, so it can hang over as long as it didn't start early. That was my main issue. Anything that was out in the surrounds couldn't start before what you heard from the stage. You know, that'd be bad. I've actually heard that in a surround concert, and it's not good.
No, it's interesting. Like,
anyway,
you have to take so many other things into consideration. Like when you start getting away from the stereo source. I mean, it's crazy.
I mean, that's a unique thing. I honestly, I was interested in initially using just the frontal system. I wanted to do that just from the clarity that I heard. And that's why I thought, oh man, you want to do surround? Are you out of your minds, everybody? You know, but I'm glad we did it. I'm so glad we did it. But
so
anyway,
do you guys think artists are going to be like trying to do this more and more? I mean, when the artists you guys work for, were they like super excited about this? Did they want to like get out there and like hear it and like see what it was all about? I mean, or was it just kind of like, oh, that's something we'll try, whatever, you know? Sandy,
So to the artists, actually, there isn't a whole lot of change to them on stage. We're using the same mics, the same in-ears, the same stage setup, same monitors. Their mixes don't change enormously or at all. They might actually they might notice, our guys notice better isolation from subs with the Elisa system, and they got really, really used to that. Although I think you can get used to either version of live sound and be happy with it. But on stage, I think it was kind of the same, until you get out in front of it. And so the manager and the people that are in charge of money and your production manager, those are the guys you need to persuade that it's a good idea and worth doing. And your lighting designer also is the guy that you need to persuade, because you're going to take some of his money away in order to pay for Elisa. So yes, we're going to do it again on a large scale, probably, if we ever have rock shows again. But not necessarily, because it's a big thing, and you're spending more money, you're paying for more techs, your venues have to be able to accommodate it. So it's not to the point where it's even though we love it and we love having done it, it's still not a given to do it. But yeah, absolutely. It was great.